Wow, good morning, and thank you for coming along to the Locus FME World Tour, a virtual event this year. Obviously a departure from what we've had in previous years, and this would have been the 10th year that we would have been taking the World Tour around New Zealand. So I guess we're taking it around New Zealand and a few other people who have registered and are logging in from around the world. So welcome to those people who aren't in New Zealand at the moment. We've got just over 200 people who I think have registered for this event. So that's absolutely fantastic. Today, obviously, we're doing this virtually. We're all living in this new world order of COVID-19. Hopefully, next year in 2021, we'll be back in front of you live. But until then, we'll persevere with webinars and see how we get on. It's new for us as well, and fingers crossed it goes smoothly. We're excited to bring you this event, and whether or not you are an experienced FME user or you're brand new to FME or you're just finding out a little bit of information, we believe there's something in this for you. Last month, Save Software held a virtualized World Tour event, and I guess if we look at that, it really was a traditional FME World Tour event. They went through what was the new releases, the new transformers, etc. And what we've done is we've put a link in the slide deck that will be sent out where you can actually click on and view that webinar as well. For our purposes, we had a look at that and we thought, how can we make this a little bit different to that, I guess, formal presentation? Also bearing in mind that around the world, there are various organizations that have held virtual FME World Tour events. So there is actually quite a number of events that you can find, click on, and learn about FME. But from our perspective, what we thought is that we'll get three of our experts, Kieran O'Donnell, Gary Nicholson and Darren Fergus, to delve into FME 2020, find out some of the really exciting features that they have a particular interest in, and then to expand on that and to let you know what they have found out. So we're going to have just a little look at the agenda now. So we're going to kick off with obviously our welcome. We're going to talk about the readers and writers. We're going to hear from Kieran O'Donnell, who will be covering three particular topics today: FME Server Applications, Map Picker functionality, and effective user parameter use. Kieran will then be followed by Gary Nicholson. Gary will take us through an in-depth look at FME Server and Automations. And automations really is something that Save just continue to push and push. And then lastly, we'll have Darren Fergus, who's going to cover machine learning in AWS, the perils of autosave, and some server versioning. Now, we are using the GoToWebinar platform. As you can see, there's an ability for all of you to send in your questions. We will get our presenters to take a few moments at the end of each of the presentation to answer those questions or any of those questions that do come through. As well, we've left some time at the end of today's webinar for any further questions that you might have. So now it's my pleasure to hand you over to our first presenter, Kieran O'Donnell. Kieran's been with Locus now for around about 2 years. He's an FME Certified Professional and trainer. He's quite well known to us for his unintentional Jared Leto impressions, and he can likely be found creating FME workspaces in the farthest corners of the globe, not just New Zealand. Kieran is the youngest, the most adventurous, and certainly one of the brightest of the Locus team. So I'm going to hand over now to Kieran. Welcome, and we look forward to your presentation.
Awesome. Thanks so much for those kind words, John. Yeah, it's good to be here today. It's a bit sad we couldn't hold our World Tour events in person, but I guess an important reminder of how useful and handy the technology that we actually have accessible to us is. How we've all actually been able to continue doing our jobs at a kind of a strange time in the world like this. So yeah, it's still good to be here. As John mentioned, I am the youngest member of the Locus team, and so I do get a bit of stick from one of my colleagues in particular about what my generation is often defined as. And so I'd kind of like to play right into that topic today around being lazy. yeah, I want to talk to you about interactive data requests in FME Server Applications, and that is, I guess the key theme here is about taking a lot of the work off of our own plates, which we maybe shouldn't really need to do anymore. And these are a really good example where I guess there's these repetitive tasks that, yeah, just aren't necessarily necessary for us technicians or analysts or technical experts to actually be performing anymore. So first of all, I want to talk to you about data requests and why they are still a problem, and then run you through a solution with a couple of examples. The solution being FME Server apps, and then the two examples, one in particular spatializing addresses and another one of data extracts. So I'll talk you through those examples, show you some FME workspaces and how they can be used to create FME server apps to, I guess, really automate and create an interactive experience for our customers, as well as reducing the load of work that we actually have to undertake as professionals. So I'd just like to open with this statement, and that's the fact that data silos will always exist until you can provide information to those who need it, exactly when they need it. So with FME, we always talk a lot about the ability to eliminate data silos, and that certainly is the case, but I guess I'd argue the point that data silos just continue to exist until people who actually use that data can actually retrieve it on demand. So as professionals, we're often still tasked with actually being the gatekeepers of that data and having to extract it. So until, I guess, your user or your customer can get it exactly at that time, there is still somewhat of a data silo that's there. So even with FME, repetitive data tasks are an ongoing challenge. And I'm sure for many of us out there, we still spend a lot of time on data requests which aren't particularly complex. They're repetitive, they don't really add value. And I mean, they do add value, but I guess there's nothing particularly complex or technical about them. So yeah, teams who are the gatekeepers to enterprise data are still often tasked with the burden of capturing and distributing that data. Customers are often far removed from that process of data capture and analysis, and as a result, that weakens the process and the output. And I guess the key issue here is that users of data see the maintenance of their own data as specialist, or the extraction of it as well. They see it as specialist, despite the fact that data has such a huge importance to all roles, regardless of the technical skills that users or customers actually have. So I'd like to draw on an example here that I used to use in training in my first role. And it was an example my very first manager gave around typists. And so we were training people on using web mapping applications, which, I mean, 5-10 years ago, they weren't really a thing in a lot of organizations. And now they're such an integral part of, in particular, GIS teams, I guess, delivery. And at the time, everyone would just be using ArcMap and exporting PDFs or maps. And so that certainly was a task that sat with a technical expert, because a piece of kit like ArcMap is so technical and there's so much you can do with it. As someone who doesn't know how to use it and doesn't spend every day on it, it's actually really overwhelming for someone to actually explore and actually use. And so we used in this training the example of typists. Once upon a time, everyone had a typist. You would write something down on paper and then you would get your typist to write it up for you. And I guess that idea is laughable now, the fact that people had typists and weren't comfortable actually typing something up themselves. So we used that example. Instead of using ArcMap to create maps, someone had a web mapping application that could actually do a smaller subset of what could be done in ArcMap. And then I guess in this scenario, this is exactly the same. So where you can do so much with FME, and there's certainly not saying that there's no need for anyone to use FME, because there is so much you can do with it. But if you give users the ability to do a smaller subset where things are less overwhelming, people are a lot more comfortable with actually doing things like data extracts when they've got a browser to interact with, and just a small, I guess, a small number of things or tasks that they could actually do. And there's no ability for them to break something or delete data. So, yeah. So I'd like to offer you a solution, and that is to use FME and let it take care of the work for you. So with that technology that we have available now, I don't believe that there's a need for analysts or technicians to perform many data-related tasks anymore. If there's a process which you have to perform on a regular basis, always think about how you can design a solution which no longer requires your involvement going forwards. How? FME Server apps. So I want to take you through these two examples, which have caused a lot of pain for me, and I feel a lot of time which I'll never get back, which demonstrate how you can build solutions where the user can get to what they need exactly when they need it. These two examples use common requests, which fill up a lot of a GIS team service requests, no matter what industry they're working in. You'll notice today I also use a lot of examples from GIS, and that's because that's where my background lies prior to really becoming an FME specialist. So while I do draw on a lot of FME examples, the same applies to whether it's engineering, surveying, anything else really, where there is data-oriented tasks. It's just a different application. So just a little bit on what are FME server apps. They're an interface which allow you to run an FME server workspace without logging into FME server. So I think that's really valuable because we often want to restrict people from using FME server because it is so powerful and there's so much you can do with it. But by making kind of a restricted interface, which doesn't necessarily need authentication, you open up a lot of power without having to, I guess, be the person who runs these workspaces yourself anymore. Server apps were first released in Server 2019.1, so they are still in their early iterations. So do expect a lot more advancements in the coming years if you are kind of underwhelmed by their appearance right now. Like anything, when it's in its first release, it's a really good advancement for starters, but do expect that they will continue to be enhanced going forwards. They're really great, I think, because they support the use of user parameters, and that allows for an interactive experience. So I'll talk you through that in a couple of my examples that I'll use today, but that is a really key thing to keep in mind about how you can use user parameters to allow that interaction. And another key component, which I talked a little bit about with the web applications, is they're accessed via a web page. So that means that users of all skill levels can be comfortable using them. There's no specialist software. Pretty much everyone is comfortable with using a browser. So it really does open it up for people to actually use things like these a lot easier as well. So now I want to talk you through a problem that was probably one of the most painful things when I first started my career, and that was the spatializing of addresses. And I still see it happen where you've got customers coming to you with spreadsheets of unformatted address strings, and then the request for you is to turn that into a map. It's a particularly time-consuming and a tedious task, and it often yields poor results. The issues with this is that you often get inaccurate or incomplete results. That frustrates both the customer and the technician or the analyst performing the task, because obviously the customer just wants 100% hit rate of actual success there, and for you, you want that as well because you don't want to perform the task again. But if you don't get, I guess, good data feeding in, there's no way that you're going to get good data feeding out. There's also a slow turnaround time associated with them for what should be a relatively simple task. You'll have a customer who has to lodge it through a service desk. It get filtered down to the correct team. Then obviously that doesn't necessarily mean it's at the top of your priorities, so they have to wait for that, and then that obviously turns into quite a lengthy wait for what should be quite a simple thing. And then I guess there's also a disconnect between customer and the process. So the customer doesn't understand what you have to do to actually turn this into a map or to have them spatialized. So yeah, I think it's really good to have the customer more closely connected to it, and then they sort of consciously think about actually how they collect data going forwards about the product or the result that they will get, because they actually have some involvement in it. So I'm just going to flick my webcam off here and then run you through a demo. So just bear with me a moment. Cool. Awesome. So here I have an interface, which is an FME server application. So what I've created is an FME server app, which is an address locator. Here it's, as I said, a very simple interface for the time being, but you can see that it's accessed via a browser. Here you have the ability to upload a file and then choose an output. So here I'm just going to upload a file, which I will show you to see what we're working with. And this is just a CSV file of some unformatted address strings in New Plymouth. So nothing particularly valuable here. These are quite nice address strings. I've certainly seen a lot worse. But now I'm going to flick over to the server application and then upload. Here I'll upload addresses.csv. It uploads it and then select OK. And then the option here is to choose either the output of a spreadsheet or a map. In this case, I'm going to create a map and then just click OK. And you'll see here that a job starts to process and run. Now, what's actually happening here is a server app. The server app is actually running a workspace in the background, and it's taking those inputs which I gave it. So the address spreadsheet, and then also choosing which output format I'd like. And you'll see here what's popped up is what would I like to do with this HTML file, and I'm going to open it. And you'll see here we just have a map and a table. So what has been run is essentially a geocode operation, and it spatialized the addresses for me and turned them into points. So you can see in the table here, we've got the original address, the status, so we found an address here, and then the formatted address. So you could run that against a geocoder which maybe had, you know, a postal address file as its reference, or what you know to be a correct address data set. And then here the long and lat values. And if I click on any of these features, you'll see the address pop up as well. If I scroll down the table, I'll get to the bottom, and you'll also see where addresses were not found. So we've got this instant feedback loop where we can actually see what worked and what didn't, and a customer has been able to, I guess, interact with that and run a workspace and get results. So if they just see that 2 addresses weren't found, they can instantly just come on and look at their source data set and see why these addresses weren't found. So maybe these addresses don't exist. Yeah, and then I guess improve that in their source data. So I'm now going to flick over to the workspace, which actually is run in the background there. And what you'll notice, hopefully, is that it's a really simple workflow. But what it does is actually extremely valuable. It's going to save a lot of time and a lot of service requests, a lot of pain for you as a technician or an analyst that actually has to run this task and deliver a better level of customer service, because your customer has an instant result, and they also have the ability to go and fix issues in the data without another lag or wait time for you to run the process again. So it's really simple here. I've got a reader, which is a CSV, and then here you can see I've actually used a user parameter to define our input spreadsheet. So here that's in our published parameters, and you can see please select your address file. So that's the prompt that we're actually given where I uploaded the CSV file in the browser. We're using an ArcGIS server geocoder. So that one had a little bit of a slow wait time, I would say, because it is just using kind of a low resource geocoding service just on a publicly available ArcGIS server. I've got a colleague, Mike Oberdries, who has built probably the most powerful geocoding service I've seen, or the use of one using IQ Office software, and you can return, I think, 500 address points in less than a second. So think about the scale if you are building something like this as well, as to what's, I guess, the most valuable or most efficient way to do this as well, if you are going to have users who maybe want to geocode tens of thousands of addresses at a time as well. But in this case, I think something like this is really simple and really easy as well. Here, if a address point is found, we treat it one way, and if we cannot find an address based on our input, we'll treat it separately. And then we loop those two streams back together. And here, another use of a user parameter. So here I'm just performing a tester on the output. So that was the drop-down we used after uploading the spreadsheet. And I've chosen either a spreadsheet or a map. So if it's a spreadsheet, what we're going to do is output that just to an Excel file. And if we wanted a map as the output, I've just used a simple HTML report generator to then create a map using Esri Leaflet and using those address points which are returned, and then also a table and defining the columns that I want to show in the table as well. So a fairly simple workspace, but that solves a pretty big problem, not problem, but a big task and a huge amount of work that people have to do, which is quite labor intensive and yields pretty poor results. So a simple workspace that's then pushed up to FME Server. I won't run you through the process of pushing it up to FME Server, but I will show you how I've created the FME Server application, because it is so simple and so quick to do. There's no reason you shouldn't start doing it today. So I'm just going to jump across to my FME server. And then here, I'll go into the server apps on our left-hand panel and go build app. Here I can define just things like the name of an app, its description, and then all I would need to do is actually select the workspace that I want. So under repository, so I've created a repository for the virtual world tour we're running today, and then choose the workspace. In this case, I used geocode, ability to set tokens so they can expire, and then here under parameters, you'll see those user parameters which I've defined in the workspace. So select your address file, so that's one of the interaction points for a user, and then which output they would like. It's really as simple as that to actually create to create a server application. You're essentially just creating an interface for a user who doesn't have access to FME Server to actually run the workspace themselves. And then you'd click OK, and as a result, that would create a server application. I'll just do that quickly. I'll just call this Address Finder. Say OK. Your FME Server app has been created. Now when I click on this URL, you'll see I've created a server application. So it's a really, really simple workflow, which is why I like this functionality so much. Cool. So now I'd like to talk to you just a little bit about why that is a good solution. I think it's great because it's interactive and the customer performs the task rather than a technician or analyst. So customers have that power to perform the task as and when required. As soon as they've got a spreadsheet of addresses, run the task, get the result. There's no wait time. There's no mucking around of logging a service request. It's done as soon as they want it done. I think what's also really valuable is that feedback loop where the customer can see what worked and what didn't, and that gives them the power to rectify any issues immediately. So as a technician or an analyst, you don't know how you want to treat, I guess, negative results where you don't actually return a result, and you don't have the ability to make that decision. The customer has to. So it's kind of that constant backwards and forwards where a lot of time creeps in and a lot of frustration as well, because you don't know, I guess essentially how a lot of context around it, your role as a technician for an analyst is to actually run the task. So whether you want to go back and fix things in the spreadsheet or just ignore them going forwards, that sits with the customer. So it's really good that the customer can actually run the task and actually make those decisions as they do it. And that connection between the customer and the process gives a broader understanding of how spatial technology works. Kind of doesn't make it such a black box, which GIS and FME is often kind of treated as well. So it gives them more of an understanding and makes them more comfortable with it. So I guess that's really valuable for our industries as well, in that people, I guess, put more effort and they put more time into actually thinking about data capture and how this works, instead of just hoping that the computer will take care of it afterwards. So now I've just got one more example that I'd like to take you through, and this one's data extracts. So despite the advancements in technology, data requests can still be a time-consuming task, which leave customers and technicians alike largely unsatisfied. Again, it's the same sort of thing where there's a slow turnaround time with service requests. You can have inaccurate extracts. That's not necessarily because we don't, know how to perform the extract. It might just be an interpretation thing, because you've often got, I guess, people who work in non-spatial fields kind of describing something spatially to you, like, an area of interest is 3,200 meters from this point to this road, and it kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. Whereas if someone who actually knows the area that they want to be data extracted from, they can actually just draw a box, which is something most people should be comfortable with as well. And there's also format compatibility issues, which can cause issues. So yeah, a lot of people using different technologies, that still creates a problem if you're using, I guess, software with limited capability to actually translate between different formats. Ooh, sorry, I jumped the gun there. So I'm just going to take you through one more example, and that's I've built a really simple data download portal here. So this one looks a little bit different, and I'll show you that later as I configure the server application. But the first part here that I'd like to show you is the map picker functionality. And for me, this is actually my favorite thing in FME 2020. And the map picker functionality is really great. I'll show you and talk you through it at the same time. So here, draw your area of interest, and I click on this map, and you'll see what instantly pops up is a map. And the user has the ability to actually define an area of interest with this little JavaScript map. So here, if I wanted to say, draw an area of interest that I wanted data for, I could draw a box. This is again New Plymouth, and I'm just going to cut off a little bit of Pukakota Park, and then click to finish, and we've just drawn a polygon, which is our area of interest. And click confirm, and you'll see what's happened here is our actual string here. This is what's defining the polygon that I just drew, and we're going to pass that into another FME workspace as, I guess, a clip area of interest. Now, what I think is really great about that is that you've now got the ability for users to really interact with a workspace and define things spatially, whereas in the past you would have had to provide that as data or line items in a spreadsheet or something that a non-spatial user was comfortable with. And this really, I guess, opens up a lot of doors for people to actually do sort of spatial operations with something that makes sense, instead of, yeah, like I said before, defining things by relative points and then you having to work backwards to figure out the area that they're actually interested in. So here, now the user can then define what data sets they want to download. So I'm going to do water mains, some property boundaries, and maybe some protected features. I'll leave contours off because those ones take a little bit longer. Now choose the output file format. So we have the ability to use just a few that I've defined. So AutoCAD, geodatabase. I'm just going to choose GeoJSON for this one because it's nice and clean with just one file as the output. And then choose the output coordinate system. So you could have that reprojected for the user as well if that was necessary. Here in New Zealand, we don't really need to worry too much about this sort of thing. Everything always tends to go in NZTM. And then I just click run. And what's going to happen there is a workspace again is being run in the background. So just while that runs, it is a little bit slow in this one, and I'll tell you why in a moment. I'm going to talk you through the workspace, which actually supports that as well. So here's just another workspace. And again, hopefully not thinking this is the most complicated workspace as well. We've got a first section here, which is kind of our initiator, and that uses the user parameters, which we defined to, I guess, trigger the reading of data sets that we want to extract. So here, this just fetches a parameter, which is our downloads. So again, I'll show you our published parameters here. And downloads, we have the ability to have a multi-choice box, which defines which data sets we actually want to download. So that will split that into an individual feature each and only trigger the data sets which the user has selected. So water mains, property boundaries, and protected trees. In this case, we didn't use the contours. Up here, this is what's really, I guess, interesting about this workspace, I think, and because it's new and allows so much interaction. We have a geometry replacer fetching a geometry parameter, which I've called location. So here, we're using a geometry replacer to actually create a bounding box, and that's based on the text that was input or created by using that map picker functionality I showed you before. So when I run this, and I'll just run it to this point here, you'll see if I click on this, we actually have created a bounding box based on the text values. This one's a little different to the one I just created before, but yeah, here's a bounding box which we're creating using that geometry parameter. And I'll just show you the geometry parameter as well, and the definition, because it is a little bit of a tricky workflow to kind of wrap your head around at first, how this turns into a JavaScript map on FME Server. So under the definition, I've created a type of geometry. So that's brand new in FME 2020. As any user parameter, I've named it, I've selected a prompt. So because we're prompting a customer or a user with this, I actually want to make sure that says exactly what would make sense to a user. In this case, draw your area of interest. Under configuration, you have the ability to select which geometry types you'd like the user to be able to define. So for a lot of things, you might just want a point. For something like a data download portal, a point or a line wouldn't make a lot of sense, but a box or a polygon does. So those are the two I've selected. And then you also specify the initial bounds for the map display. So this bounding box defines that area of New Plymouth City that the map started on just before as well. And then the default value, so that's just what I've put in as a default, and that's what's created the bounding box on that part that I ran to just before. Cool, so we decide which features we want to download. We then run it through a clip. I'm sure a lot of users out there will have noticed that I'm not performing the clip on the feature reader. So that in most cases will actually be more efficient. So you could actually feed that in as a spatial filter here and see if only return features which intersect with this data, with the input, that clip there. I'm not 100% sure why, but in this case, it didn't actually improve the performance, it reduced it. I have a feeling it's to do with the fact that I'm actually using an open data ArcGIS service, So I think it's probably something to do with the location of the data being up there in ArcGIS Online, and it's trying to perform a clip. For whatever reason, it was slower. So do actually think about that when you do your when you build these apps as well. I know that in most cases we think if, you know, as just a rule of thumb, if you read less data in, it will be faster. In this case, performing that clip on the data set actually slowed down the process. So do think about that when you actually build these apps as well. So yeah, the clip performs that based on our bounding box. And then we're filtering for output to the correct writer. So here we've got filter based on our output. And in this case, I've got a drop down, which you see corresponds to what you saw in the server app before. And then as a result, based on that, we filter it out and feed it to the correct writer feature type, whether it be a geodatabase, AutoCAD, GeoJSON file, or the shape file. This is a little bit clunky here, and there is certainly better ways to do it with things like a generic writer. It's something to consider, but you do also have to consider how that works in terms of the different output types you have. For things like GeoJSON files or AutoCAD, you can put multiple geometries into the same file, but for things like geodatabase and shape files, we know that we can only have you know, one geometry type for each one. So for each either feature class inside the file geodatabase or shape file. So do consider that as well when you're building things like this. So in the same sense, we would publish up to FME Server, and I'll just show you quickly the actual configuration. Well, I won't talk you. Sorry, I will actually. Build you the application again. So here, downloads, you can enter a description. In this case, virtual world tour, data download. And in this case, I want to use a data download service. Now you'll see under parameters, what we're getting here is our area of interest, same thing as before. And what's really interesting is you would have seen in the desktop version, you just had a text box to actually define your area of interest with text. If you've used a geometry parameter type, when it's published to FME Server, this functionality is built in to allow for that map picker functionality. So that's that link. When you publish up a geometry user parameter, when it's published to FME Server, it comes up with this map icon where the user can define that geometry. And you'll see there I used polygon and box as the options. So those are the only two which come up. Yeah. And then I'll just show you this last thing, which I didn't show before, which is customize. So you have the ability to add in titles, background colors, images, and icons. So that's something to also consider around branding. I would highly recommend spending the time to actually do a bit of branding, because it sort of makes people more comfortable with it if it seems like a customer-driven user interface. I don't think anyone really needs to know that FME Server is going on in the background, because it is, yeah, a piece of technology that no one needs to know is going on. So here I've got the data download URL that's popped up as a result, and you can see if I click there, I'm just going to save it. It's finished downloading, and if I open up FME Data Inspector and the file I've downloaded, you'll see we've just got a single GeoJSON file. If I drag that into Data Inspector, it instantly knows it's a GeoJSON file. And that's the area that I actually defined using that map picker. Here we've got property boundaries, which I've just turned off. I'll turn off our protected features. You can see water mains, property boundaries, and a couple of protected trees quite close to Pukukura Park there. Cool. So I'm just going to close out here and again talk to you about why that's a good solution. I think the ability to extract data on demand and eliminate the lengthy wait times really does leave your customer satisfied. Customers have the power to define exactly what data they want. So there's that use of that map picker functionality, as well as the layers that they've defined or the data sets that they actually want to extract. And that removes the possibility for those incorrect exports. And that, again, is another thing which frustrates the customer and the technician. Using FME Server Apps, you unlock the power of FME to an end consumer, removing any potential data compatibility issues. So by giving the user the power to actually define which format they want, which coordinate system, things like that, you actually unlock the use of FME to a lot wider audience. So just to sum up, FME Server Apps are the interactive link between your workspaces and the customer. Allowing your customers to run processes can save you time, yields more accurate results, and seriously improves the level of customer service that you can offer. By utilizing FME Server Apps well, you can eliminate the need to perform repetitive data tasks, and that frees you up for time to deliver even more value-add services. So I know I led with they're really good for being lazy, but it's not about being lazy. It's just about not doing the work that you don't need to do. The working smarter, not harder kind of mentality. Things like data extracts or spatializing of addresses, while they do have a spatial component, I firmly believe that there's no reason that technicians or analysts should actually be performing those sort of tasks anymore. The technology is there for people to go and run it on demand. And as an expert, if you can actually just build robust processes which allow for flexibility, we no longer have to do them anymore. So I'll just leave you with a couple of summary tips for creating server apps, and they all relate to one key theme, and that's think of the customer. So I would implore you to follow these, and that's using simple non-industry specific language, no jargon or acronyms, and that includes FME and GIS. I've seen that in a lot of organizations. As soon as you sort of mention acronyms like FME and GIS, a lot of people get uncomfortable because they sort of see it as a black box and just don't really want to know what goes on there because there is so much they can do. So for something, like a data extract, it doesn't have to be FME and GIS anymore. It's a data download portal. So don't clutter it up with acronyms and I guess industry specific terms. When you use user parameters, also use them for both interaction and restriction. So we obviously want to allow for interaction with things like file uploads or choosing, sort of choices, but you don't want to use things like free text, or if you've got, say, the address example, you'd maybe want to use address files which can only be CSV or an Excel file. So you allow that interaction by allowing the user to upload a file, but you want to restrict which types of file they can upload, because obviously if they try and upload a Word document, it's not going to run. So as a result, that still lumps you with the task and the user gets frustrated. So just make sure that you do actually define them to allow them to use it, but not allow them to do anything with it. And another one is use the most appropriate FME service. So for the most part, I know our server users typically are always, for the most part, are still using job submitters. In the first example where we created a map, that was the data streaming service. So that was most appropriate to actually stream back data to the user and have them just open a file. They don't need to download an HTML file. They can just open it directly in the browser. In the second example, it's a data download portal. So the data download service certainly makes the most sense in that case as well. And lastly, like anything, invest in documenting your solutions well. It just makes more people comfortable with it and allows them to use it well, and I guess not get frustrated if it doesn't work. If it's not working, it's quite possibly because they're not using it correctly, and that documentation helps really well. So once again, there's no need to perform repetitive data tasks yourself. Let FME and the customer take care of it. And I'd employ you to think about what tasks can you automate completely. I've shown you a couple of examples there, but you can think of other things off the top of your head, I'm sure, like permits to dig, site reports, maybe sort of like an online limb tool, reporting between date ranges. That one's probably quite topical right now. I know in the past, a lot of people do sort of a monthly report for a team. I know some places are sort of wanting to understand more what the impact of COVID and the lockdowns had on them. So if you've set up, I guess, processes where people can interact with it and select a date range, they could really see what the impact of things were at the level 2s, 3s, and 4s that we've just gone through, as opposed to just a blanket month. So that's really valuable as well. So thanks very much for listening. I hope you've all got something out of that as well. I will just see if I've got any questions come through while we're here. I've had a question from David. David, I think you're at Palco, aren't you? What geocoding service are you using in the background? It's not yours, David. It is a publicly available one, though. Yeah, it is a publicly available one, but it is not yours. It is New Plymouth District Council's. So there's plenty of publicly available ones out there for, there's plenty of publicly available ones that are actually out there. And so do think about that when you publish your services as well, that people could be doing sort of things like this. Oh, that's a great question there from Paul Goodhue. Is it possible to set a login for an FME server app? Yes, it is. Sorry, John, would you be able to just change me back to the presenter there for a moment? If you can. I'll just show Paul this because that is something I missed out. So a very, very good question. So this was actually new in 2020 as well. So just bear with me a sec and I'll show you that. My messy screen going on. So back in FME Server Applications, when you're on Build Apps, under Create, if you go down here, there's Require Authentication. So you can configure the users who have access to this app. So if I click on that, you can see there's the ability to define allowed users, and you can either restrict that to a group or certain users that you actually have in your FME server. So for different apps, then you could define which users actually have access to each app. Yeah, hang on. Sorry, I'll see if there was another part to that question. I've just lost the panel here. Yeah, so you use the username to tie that. Yep, that would be a perfect example to use authentication. For anyone who's used server apps in the last release in 2019, that wasn't there, but it was improved in 2020, I think, because yeah, there was the realization that logins would be essential for some of these tasks as well. Someone said, how did the process know that the addresses were in New Plymouth rather than Wellington or Christchurch? I was using a New Plymouth geocoding service. Thanks, Grant. I will just have a look at any other questions that pop up because I think I am running out of time. And I'll probably just drop them back to you in the question box and maybe loop around and mention anything at the end if it's certainly something I've missed, which would be of use to everyone. But thanks all for listening, and I'll hand you back over to John again.
Righto. Kieran, well, first of all, thanks very much for that presentation. There were quite a number of questions that did come through, and in the interest of time, I know it's difficult to get all of them immediately, but as Kieran noted, he'll get some responses to you perhaps directly. We'll cover them off in the Q&A at the end of today's session. So there are a couple of other questions that came through, which generally I can comment on, and also for those people who have logged in after we started. So a couple of people have asked about these slides being made available, and absolutely all of the presentations today, and in fact recording of today's session, will be made available to everybody who's registered We're planning on getting that out to you early next week. I will say Tuesday, but somebody might chop my head off if I do lock us into that. So look out for that early next week in any case. To the person who asked me if I'm auditioning for Santa Claus at the end of the year for the Locus function, well, as probably most of you know, I've been working on the food aspect quite successfully for a while now, so I thought I'd go for the bed and see how that plays out. I'll keep you posted. But I thought before we just head on to our next presenter, who's going to be Gary Nicholson, I thought we'll just click on a slide here, which will show, and where are we here? It's not wanting to click on. Ah, there it is. So look, as I said at the beginning of today's session, we're going to include this slide as part of our slide deck that does go out. This is a list of all of the new readers, writers, connectors and transformers that have been released by SAFE in FME 2020. So that webinar, which SAFE did a few weeks ago, is going to cover these particular releases in more depth. Again, we're going to provide you a link to that SAFE webinar where you'll be able to log in, listen, and learn a little bit more about them. Along with the list on this slide, FME 2020 also includes improvements to the speed of shapefiles in Excel and OGC GeoPackages readers and writers, along with connection improvements in ArcGIS Pro, including Esri Utility Network and annotations. So look, if you have any questions in relation to the 2020 release, or you need a little support, just fire us a question. We'd be more than happy to help. And if there's something further that we need, we can always be in touch with SAFE. Right, it's now my pleasure to turn us over to Gary Nicholson. Gary's been with me, with Locus, since the earliest of days, which is over 10 years now. I don't think many people can claim to have the level of expertise in FME that Gary does. And that's not just in the New Zealand context. At the FME events hosted by SAFE, Gary is recognised globally as being a leading light in FME, and we're very fortunate and lucky to have him on our team. He's a particularly patient person and is able to walk people through a lot of their issues. In his spare time, you might have seen some of his posts on Twitter in terms of some of the cool stuff that he develops. Turning Christmas lights on to play with your favorite musical tune was one of the highlights of last year. And of course, he does a heck of a lot of hard work for Oxfam, and it was a real shame this year that with the COVID issue that event wasn't able to take place. He is and continues to be an avid runner, and he develops his own apps like Podium, where you can check that out on the Apple platform. But it's a great pleasure that I turn you over now to Gary Nicholson. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, John. All right, Kieran's covered one way of automating FME workflows, which is allowing the end user to run workspaces. I'm going to cover some more automations that are possible in FME Server. I'll recap what has been possible in previous versions and move on to the latest automations methods that are available in 2020 with some demos at the end, and also show you how the demo gremlins almost got me this morning and how FME Server projects saved me. I'll come to that before the demo. So FME Server's always been about automating your processes. That is possible to do some basic automations in FME Desktop with Windows scheduled tasks, and I'll quite often use a master workspace with a timer to run other workspaces. But FME Server is all about automations, making it so much easier to run your workflows. And a lot of the time, set it up and forget about it. You can sit on the beach, and we'll go to the FME Spa. That's the theme of this world tour this year. Sit at the spa while FME Server is doing your work for you. The work that it's safe for doing around FME Server is, let me skip this one and go to this one. It's around enterprise integration patterns. In enterprise integration, a pattern is a repeatable solution to a commonly occurring problem encountered when integrating applications or systems. The pattern is a template for how to solve a problem that occurs in many different situations. The Bible for enterprise integration patterns is this book by Gregor Hope and Bobby Wolf. It covers about 65 different enterprise integration patterns, and SAFER tried to make sure that FME Server can cover as many of these as possible. And I'll swap over to the website for that book, which is here. The book itself is quite expensive, a couple $100 for the hardback, but the Kindle version is quite reasonable. If I go to this page here, it's a list of all of the 65 different integration patterns. If you have a look at them, there's one here, message filter. How can a component avoid receiving uninteresting messages? So if you think of this in FME terms, it's a test filter or attribute filter. Splitter, how can we process a message if it contains multiple elements, each of which has to be processed in a different way? Again, test filter, attribute filter might be there. Aggregator, FME's got an aggregator transformer. You can see here, this is all FME terms basically, and a lot of them FME already can manage just from the basic transformers. But with the automations in FME Server, SAFER making sure that as many of these different enterprise integration patterns can be covered. So no matter what your workflow is, how you process messages, FME Server will be able to do it. If we go back 2 slides, here are some of the tools that FME Server has for automating workspaces. Server apps, Kieran's just covered. Other ways are workspace runners. So in one workspace, you can trigger off another workspace. And I've done one a few years ago when FME Server was first came out. And a master workspace ran up to 30 or 40 separate workspaces after that. Next stage, which came out a few years ago, is the topics, notifications, and subscriptions method. So I'll show you both of these two just to remind ourselves how these work. Automations came out a year or so ago. It is built on top of the topics system, but it's a lot easier to use. Schedules, it's fairly straightforward. You set up a workspace to run at a particular time, every hour, just one off. Webhooks is similar to the server apps, but instead of a user loading up the app and setting all the parameters, a third-party application could trigger a workspace through a webhook. And there's also a FME Server API available as well if you want to start running workspaces through JavaScript or other coding languages. So there's multiple ways we can automate it. I'm going to be looking at these top 3, particularly seeing how easy it is to automate things now with the automations. So FME Server Job Submitter, this was the first method that was available to start chaining workspaces together. For the example today, I've set up two simple workspaces. The first one, you can see here, creates 10 features with a creator transformer. Each of those gets given a random number between 0 and 100. And we want to pass that number onto a second workspace. So using the FME Server job submitter, the second workspace gets loaded up in the FME Server job submitter transformer, and each feature coming through will run that workspace. So it's easy to pass parameters here. The number coming out of the random number generator goes into a publish parameter of this workspace. The disadvantage of this method, though, this workspace needs to know where that random number is going. So the two workspaces have to be tightly coupled. When I come to the notifications, I'll show you how this workspace can be decoupled from the second workspace. So the workspace that generates the random number doesn't know what's happening to it once it's passed it on. And that decoupling makes things a lot more flexible. And another con, changes in the other workspace. If the published parameter name changed in the other workspace, then it would break this workspace. So looking at the receiving workspace, it's triggered off by a creator transformer. The published parameter that gets the incoming number is retrieved from the parameter fetcher. All I'm doing here is a simple squaring that number and sending it out to a log file. This is how FME Server job submitter transformer works. I'll show you a demo after I've gone through the other methods. The next way of starting to decouple these workspaces and chain them together is the FME Server notifications. Let me just turn off my camera. FME Server notifications system. Now, this decouples workspaces and workflows with a topic. Now, I always have to think how this works. The topic is really just a placeholder, but it ties together notifications and subscriptions. Notification is something that can send information to a topic or trigger a topic. A subscription is something that listens to a topic and carries out an action after that topic has been triggered. So whenever I look at using this FME Server notifications, I have to remind myself how notifications and subscriptions are tied into topics, because it is hard to follow. So if you can't follow it, you're not the only one. But don't worry, you don't need to think about it too much in 2020. So the workspace, similar from before, generating 10 random numbers. But now all it's doing is sending that random number off to a topic using FME Server notifier transformer. The receiving workspace, it receives the data now as a text file, so it's using the text reader. Quite often you'll also use a JSON reader here. A lot of the times you're passing data through the topics in a JSON file. For this simple one, it's just a text file containing that number. This workspace will be set up to subscribe to the topic. Whenever information comes into that topic, this workspace will fire up. The number will come through here. Again, I'll square it and send it to the log. Now, because this was so tricky to understand and follow how things happened, safe, we've come up with the FME Server Automation system. And FME Server Automations Writer is available now in 2020. FME Server Automations has been around for a year or so. Now with the FME Server Automations Writer, it's even more useful. So a similar workspace, but now we've got a special writer here called the Automations Writer. And here I've added one of those to the workspace with one feature type, and the random number gets sent through to that writer. And in the receiving workspace, no, I don't actually have the receiving workspace, but FME Server Automations is a graphical interface to build these workflows together. With the topics, notifications, and subscriptions, you couldn't really see how everything was tied together. The FME Server Automations Writer, it's a similar concept to your FME Workbench. It's drag and drop the various components and build the workflow. So the first workspace is here, because I have the FME Server Automations Writer generating a feature type. That feature random number will come through here, and I can chain that to the receiving workspace. So, let's swap over to my FME server, and we'll show you how this all ties together. Before I do that, we did this talk to Australia last week, and I hadn't looked at my FME server since then. At 8:30 this morning, I thought I'd better check to see that everything was working, and I got that. And what had happened is the Azure machine, virtual machine that this particular FME server was running on, was just going on an evaluation license, and that expired first thing this morning. So luckily, I had created an FME server project file after last week's talk, so we could share these workspaces. And rather than having to fire up this Azure machine again, which probably involved adding a credit card, I was able to take the FME server project, move it over to another machine, this is running on my desktop at home, and just import the FME server project, and I was up and running within literally 2 minutes. If we look at what's inside that project file that I created last week, I had the half a dozen workspaces I created, the subscription, the topic, a couple of topics, and the automations. I was able to bundle all of that up into one neat file, and it saved me a lot of grey hairs trying to get that other server up and running. All I needed to do was also add a web connection file, which I didn't add to the project for security reasons. Didn't want to supply that to everyone so that they could get access to our FME server. And once I've done that, everything was up and running within a couple of minutes. So if you haven't used project files, please start using them back here. But what we want to show is workspaces. I'm going to use the workspace viewer in FME server. If you haven't seen this, if you're a couple of years out of date, we can now view workspaces in FME server. You don't have to download them to FME desktop. And eventually you may be able to do simple editing in here. So now we'll view the workspaces. Yeah, so the first workspace, the creator transformer. If you double click, you can see the parameters. I'm creating 10 features here. It's going into a random number generator, generating a random number between 0 and 100. Which goes into a FME Server job submitter. So that's going to submit this workspace log number _1. So I can come up here and run that workspace using the job submitter, run. It's already completed. Come over here and look at jobs. 11, 12, right. That first workspace ran and ran the other job 10 times. Look at the log file here. Incoming number through the publish parameter 92. That's squared as that. Writing result file. That's triggering one workspace from another with FME Server job submitter. Next method is using the topics system. So it's similar here, creating 10 features, random number, and the FME Server notifier. Sending this random number as the content to the random topic. So let me just run that while I'm in here. If we go to the notification system, we've got a topic called random, which that data got applied to. A topic by itself doesn't really do much. If we look at subscriptions, we can see this subscription is looking at that random topic, firing, it's set up to run a FME workspace, and it fires this workspace. So just show you what other options we have for subscriptions. We could send data to Amazon S3. There's some more Amazon queuing, message queuing, Microsoft Azure event grid. We'd send a file to Dropbox, email, send something to an FTP server, HTTP request. We could use a webhook for some other system. Java messaging service, you can just log it, SFTP or WebSockets. In this case, a lot of the time you'll use a subscription to run a FME workspace. And you can see here that the data from that topic gets sent through as the input to the source text file reader. And while I'm here, I'll just go to publications and show you how topics can be fired off. A lot similar to subscriptions. A directory watch is a useful one. You can watch a directory for files getting added or deleted. Same with Dropbox. You can listen for emails coming in with that IMAP or XMTP. Watch an FTP server. You go in Java messaging, UDP. Maybe you've got a vehicle tracking unit out there that sends data by UDP. It could trigger off a workspace to process the message, or WebSockets. In this case, I fired off that topic, and hopefully that other job would have run 10 times. You can see it's been triggered off by the square number subscription. Now, the problem with the notification system is it's just so hard to see the flow of data. If you've got multiple jobs getting triggered by topics and publications firing multiple topics, it's easy to get caught up, and it has caught me up before where I had one job triggering a topic which I was also listening to. I ended up in an endless loop, and that was running on FME Cloud. Actually cost a fair bit of money. But now with FME 2020, we've now got a graphical interface for how all of these are tied together. So let me just stop this automation. We've got triggers to trigger a workflow. I double click on that, we can see what the events are. Because this is built on top of the notification system, pretty similar to what we saw for publications. Then once something has been triggered, we can perform an action. Again, this will be similar to what we saw in subscriptions. We run a workspace, merge messages, log messages, filter messages. Filter, quite a simple filter. In this case for a random number, I could say I'm interested if the random number is 45. Apply that. It would only pass a message through if that was 45. So you can do simple filtering in here. In my case, I'm just running that. I've got a topic listener here to trigger this workflow. That once that's triggered, it runs that first workspace, which generates random numbers. The FME server writer here outputs it through this port, and that runs that second logging workspace. We can also do external actions, which will be similar to what we saw in subscriptions, HTTP requests, send emails, etc., etc. Now, another way to trigger this is there's not actually a button here to trigger something manually. I could either go and fire off the topic that it's listening to here. The other way it's possible to do it is to set this up as a schedule. And I'll tell it to start in 2025. I don't actually want it to automatically fire. What I can do is start this automation and double click on this, and we can trigger that manually now. If I trigger that, this workspace will run, generate the 10 actions. The 10 numbers will be passed out of here into this workspace. So, trigger. Schedule's triggered. And you'll be able to see the triggered jobs on here. Today at 11:20. Is that correct time? Yep. Fired off the first job, and then that fired off the next one, and should see some random numbers coming through here. So 58 squared is 3364. Here's an example which shows multiple automations writers. In this particular workspace, I said, okay, if a random number is less than 50, it's going to come out this port. If it's more than 50, it will come out this port. If there's an error, it goes out another port. So now you can see you can start building quite complicated workflows. And this dotted line here is similar to what I warned about in the topic system. You are allowed to loop these things. So then maybe some cases where you want to loop back to the workspace and run it multiple times. One thing I can think of is been using the Zero API, and that only returns a certain number of records at a time, but includes a flag which says there's more records available. So I could look at that flag, and if it's true, I could loop back around, increment the number of records I'm asking for, and run that workspace until the flag is false. So it is possible to do loop. I'll warn you to be very careful about using that. It is easy to tie up your engines and make things come to its knees. But it is there, and you'll be able to make some quite complex workflows. I think that's all I wanted to show about automations. But while I'm in here, I'm just going to quickly show a couple of new features in FME 2020. One is broadcast messages. As a system admin, you can tell all your other users about important things that they need to know. So say FME Server is going to be rebooted. You've got different severity levels. We're rebooting it for the critical one. I'm going to do it now. Now everyone else logged into FME Server is going to get a message saying it's going to be rebooted. The other cool feature I like in FME 2020, we've seen how we can view workspaces, which reduces the need for FME desktop. Reducing it even more, you can now upload workspaces directly from FME Server. So let's cancel that. But so your colleague might develop a workspace. They may not have access to FME Server. They can just send you the FMW file. You can now upload it into FME Server without having to go to the publish in FME Desktop. So I think the decoupling of FME Desktop and FME Server is slowly happening. I don't think you'll ever get away from not needing FME Desktop, but you can start doing a lot more in FME Server. I think with that, I'll pass back to John. I'll see if there's any questions. Stand by. Put on my video. Let's see.
Thanks, Gary. There are 2 or 3 questions there for you that I've seen that have come through. So if you've got a moment to have a quick look at them, that'd be great. Otherwise, while we're listening from Darren, perhaps you can reply there at the end.
Yeah. Stephen's asked, can FME Server act on database triggers like inserts? I think you can set up the database, or some databases, to call FME Server with a webhook on inserts. That would probably be the easiest way to do it. Otherwise, yeah, as you say, it's having FME comparing the database for changes in the data might work. But I'd look into having the database call a webhook. Could be the most efficient way for that. Not something I've done before. I'm sure we could figure something out. What's the best way to handle FME Server job priorities? I'd have to look into prioritizing that. I'd have to get back to you on job priorities 1.4. You have to be careful with automations that you've got enough engines and you assign jobs to the right queues so that people don't chew up your engines and they're not available for mission critical tasks. So there's a number of ways we can do that, but I'll have to have a live to look and get back to you with that one.
I think there's one more from Daniel, Gary.
Yeah, we have, can you have multiple triggers enabled for a workbench, i.e. scheduled and webhook? Yeah, absolutely. You saw in my automations, I had the trigger, then I added a schedule. So yeah, you can have as many triggers for the workbenches as possible. And it's going to be interesting to see how complex people make these automations.
Cool. Thanks, Gary. If there's any other questions, please do send them through. As I said at the beginning of the webinar, our team will have a look at those questions as they come through and either answer them directly or perhaps address them at the end of the sessions. Just an observation, a couple of people have mentioned that they've had an issue or two with audio, etc. So just a reminder that the video of this will be sent out to everybody. There doesn't appear to be too many people who have raised that as an issue, but hopefully hang in there for the rest of the session and it'll go smoothly. Our last speaker today, so again with great pleasure, that I'm able to introduce Darren Fergus. Darren, we've left to last. He's got a real exuberance for FME, as I think most of our team do. For those of you who have met and heard from Darren, it's great to have his vibrancy and his personality as part of the Locus team. Darren, as well, is an FME Certified Desktop Professional, as well as being an FME trainer. We've been doing some virtual training in the last few weeks, something that we've tried in these COVID-19 days, and that's gone really successfully. And as some companies do come back to work physically or remain remote, it gives us a good option in terms of offering training services coming up. So without any further ado, it's my pleasure to hand over now to Darren. Darren, over to you. Oh,
hey.
Hold on a minute. There you go.
Yep.
There's a quick photo of Darren, just in case you couldn't see it. All right, Darren.
All right, thank you very much, John. Great introduction. And yeah, I think you picked up a good point earlier with the technical problems. My enthusiasm does definitely relay into my presentations and my training, and being that we're delivering this virtually, I'll be a little bit more conscious that perhaps we're getting intermittent technical sound issues. So I'll try and slow things down a wee bit for people, which is hard because this is super exciting, right? You know, at the end of the day, we're in a world crisis, and you know, we're able to deliver this content virtually. I said to somebody the other day, you know, if this had happened 10 years ago, would we have been able to do it? That's a good question. So I feel that whilst it's really bad times and there's a lot of unfortunate people out there, we're at least lucky that we can still work with each other, and you know, we live in New Zealand. That's a pretty great thing. So I'm just gonna get the main screen up. Here we go. Hopefully everybody can see that. So who am I and what do I do? Many of you know me already. I'm a certified professional and a certified trainer. And look, I love what I do. I love being a part of the safe software thing, let's call it, right? You know, where somebody that's not a programmer, they're not a developer per se, can, you know, with some basic understanding, build up that knowledge and go and achieve some amazing things. You know, I love the story actually where I work both and support both New Zealand and Australia. And I love how as I get to find out that, you know, the commonality between problems between obviously the two different countries and how they're solved in different ways, and being the kind of go between that, you know, the mechanism where I find out, you know, how, you know, organizations in Australia, you know, how they've solved that problem and how they've used FME, and being able to relay that over to the clients in New Zealand, and then same with the clients in New Zealand over to Australia, and then, you know, discovering the different, just seeing the progression from the different levels, you know, where we're just organizations just discovering what FME is, right up to you know, ESB, enterprise service bus, publishing subscription model, and all the cool things that go off the back of that. So I feel really fortunate to be able to do what I do. So thank you very much, John. Great opportunity. So let's just get on with things. I'm going to be covering off 3 separate topics. We're going to be talking about the importance of versioning. And look, versioning, this is really focused towards those of you that have FME Server that obviously has a license, but you've not got version enabled on it. And then secondly, we're going to talk about, this is also focused towards those of you that really want a version tool, but you've not got an FME Server license. So don't worry, I've kind of got you on that one. And I'm going to touch on autosave gotchas. Yeah, that's probably one that not too many people have thought about, but I've definitely been caught out with it, and I'm just going to touch on that lightly. Secondly, FME and unconventional thinking. So look, this isn't really unconventional thinking per se, but you know, we talk about FME, translation, transformations, integration, ESB, and all those different types of things, GIS. But you know, actually, do you know what? FME at its simplest can just be a really useful tool for lots of different things. And one of those really sort of good scenarios where I've used FME to help support me and save a bit of money is in AWS. I have AWS, I deliver training machines, and there's a couple of kind of need to knows when you're working with AWS, and I'll cover that off a little bit later. And I use FME and command line to be able to make it simpler and easier for me to manage. Lastly, the super cool AWS recognition service. And all I'm going to say on this at the moment, it's all fun and games, or is it? The importance of versioning, the why. Look, you know, the why is actually a really easy question to ask. We look at an organization, and the production environment is, you know, it's the holy grail. It's the thing that has to work. It's the thing that passes all sorts of information through the organization. And, you know, having FME at the back of that, doing all these automations and providing all these integrations, and that translation and transformation of data is hugely important. And, you know, what are ways that you can mitigate that, right? Well, you know, I guess ways to mitigate that is you have skilled staff that are provided training, staff that have procedures and processes and documentation available to them that allows them to do the best job that they can. And then you have an IT team that sits behind, you know, your whole infrastructure that are capable of providing you what you need. And in an ideal world, that might look something like a production environment, a user accepted tested environment, and a development environment. Does that mitigate against the risk entirely to, you know, something failing over? Absolutely not. But it's certainly a sure way towards doing the best that you can. But we live we don't live in an ideal world. So we have to think about what things can we do from an FME perspective to at least protect that and give the staff, etc., the support that they need and the protection that they need, so that you can carry out your tasks every day. So let's talk about, you know, the issue 101 of organizations with regards to things going wrong from a FME perspective. So accidentally killing a workspace, you might ask yourself, how do you accidentally kill a workspace? Look, Safe Software provide a very good application. Desktop is fantastic. You know, it rarely crashes, but it does, you know, and it rarely goes wrong, but it does. Okay, and you know, it doesn't matter if it's 1 in 10,000 or 1 in 100,000, it can go wrong, and therefore, you know, if you understand that risk, you need to have processes in place that protect you against that. So accidentally killing a workspace could be a new user comes in, modifies a workspace, it creates problems. They've done it in the production environment, they've not made a copy, there's no way to roll it back. And not only does it bring down the production environment, stop the data flow across the organization, it also means that somebody needs to try and work out what's happened and re-engineer that workspace if at all possible. So that's a pretty big issue. Secondly, not quite as bad, perhaps you've introduced a bug to a workspace. Perhaps this user's a little bit more clever, you know, they've followed a little bit better practice. They haven't made a copy, but they've gone in, they've edited it, they've changed a few parameters, they've not seen that they needed to make a copy, they've tested it, perhaps they have a sampler in there. you know, there's a big data set, they sampled those features coming through, and it's worked, and they published it up to production, you know, and the scheduled tasks, it's failed, and that's become a problem. And that's okay, you know, somebody can go in and they can fix that, but there's no way to roll that back. And, you know, that's a significant issue. It's definitely something you need to be aware of. And then lastly, this is the biggest, I feel this is the biggest problem no matter where you go. The which workspace nightmare, right? You tell me anybody that you don't know, that you know, that hasn't had this issue somewhat, okay? So what this is where you've got multiple users of FME, they're authoring workspaces, you know, there's no standards, or the standards vary depending on what team that you're with, on how to name a workspace, and, you know, how to manage that with the location that you store it in. So anybody new like myself or somebody coming in to provide support comes there and you're like, oh, which workspace is the one I'm editing? Oh, we don't know. You'll have to go through and find out, which absolutely happens. So the long and short of it is we want to be able to have something in place that can protect us against that. So versioning, okay. So especially for those of you that already have FME Server and it's licensed, it really is a click of a button and it gives you version capability. You know, it's fundamentally it's a game changer on how you protect your how you protect any environment. Doesn't matter if it's production, UAT, or development. How you protect any environment and how you have ability to roll back. So in simple terms, let's think about what FME Server is and what desktop is. So server is basically, it's like the hub that serves all the information and provides you enterprise level capability. It serves all that information across your organization or wider. And then desktop, which is a client to FME Server, provides you the ability to be able to, you know, author workspaces, create automations and integrations and transformations of data, right? Now, because of the relationship between desktop and server, what that means is you can actually, we'll make it simple, right? You can publish to FME Server. So in desktop, you can take a workspace that you've authored and you can publish that up into server, and you can configure that up there, whether it be an automation, whether it be a scheduled task, whether it be a server app, like Kieran was talking about earlier on. You know, on the other side of things, you need to update a workspace, or you need to be able to edit a workspace, enhance it in some way, right? Optimize it in some way, in which case you can download that. And then there's the in-between, which is republished, but we're not really going to go into that because I think that kind of makes sense. So let's talk about the benefits of being able to use desktop and publishing correctly, right? And when I say correctly, it means publishing correctly in the sense that when we author a workspace for the very first time and we have server enabled, it allows us to be able to publish a workspace and commit that workspace. When a workspace is committed, it means that we have a point to roll back to if we go and republish or we go and publish another workspace, or if we edit it, okay? And I'll show you that in a minute. I'll actually show you my FME server and just some of the, well, actually the tools that I'm going to show you in a minute. I'll show you how it looks from an FME server perspective, and you can see how you can roll back. And then the other side of this, we talked about users going into the environment like a production environment. That's kind of like a no-go, right? You know, you don't want people going on your environments and doing this. You want them to be able to, you know, take that workspace and store it locally, edit it locally. And the download function as part of FME Desktop allows you just to do that straight away. You know, so if you use desktop properly, you download, you connect to your FME server, you download that workspace, you edit it, and if you're those other people that like broke it in some way or form, you know, like you're testing it on your machine, you got the connections available to you, and you break it, and so much so that you can't work out, oh my goodness, I've totally destroyed this workspace and I can't work out how to get back to where I was. The great news is, guess what? You can just hit the download button and you download that copy and overwrites the existing one. So you're not in a situation where you can't recover it. You're not in a situation where you're impacting a production or any other environment. You're in a controlled environment, right? I mean, look, nothing fixes stupidity or rushing things, okay? You know, so you still need to follow practice. It means when you commit a change, you know, assuming it's not you're just putting annotation on that. But if you're committing a change where you've changed parameters or some other added transformers, you commit that and you make a note about what you're committing. So I'm just going to quickly show you what you'd be looking at with FME Server. So this is my FME Server REST interface, and I'm just going to go to Workspaces, Manage Workspaces, and you can see I've got a lot of stuff in here. ExtremeX, I actually use this FME to run a booking system and all sorts of automations as part of the company I run over in New Zealand. Cool company, by the way. Anyway, let's get to task at hand. AWS tools. So this is what we're going to be talking about later, and let's just have a look at one. So machine learning, this is one that we're going to work through. So if I just have a look, I click on the workspace and then I just go into history, and then you can see then there's 3 different versions there. Okay, so if I had a problem with my production or whatever automation that I've been trying to carry out, or sorry, workspace I've been running, and I know that I can go back to the previous version that worked just by downloading that and republishing that, and then I can spend the time trying to understand what's gone wrong with the one that I've currently run and had the issue with. So it's definitely worth doing. And then lastly, what I'll say on that is those of you that really want versioning, like you want all this, look, Safe Software are really amazing. They think about how they can make it easier for as many people as possible, right? And what they've actually done is they've made FME Server so that you can actually install this on, you know, like a machine. Even, I mean, you could put it on your computer, but it would make sense to put it on some environment that people can share in your organization, a machine that's provisioned up and dedicated to, that you can then access the version capability of that, even if it's not licensed. And I'm not going to go into all the details about how you do that. However, if it's something you're interested in, if you flick me an email after the fact, I'll put some helpful guide so that you can do that in your organization. And there was one more thing that I alluded to earlier on, the auto save gotchas. Right, so I mean, I picked this one up. I didn't know the autosave feature was in. I was doing training, and you know, as a trainer, what I like to do is I take a workspace and I said, oh, by the way, there's 2 or 3 ways to do the same thing. You know, like my workspace won't look the same as Kieran's or Gary's, you know, and actually very often, sometimes you change your mindset on how you've done a workspace and you actually change it and you play about with optimizing it. That's what we love doing. But if I open up a workspace and I'm talking in a training environment, and then I go, oh, you can do this, 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 and this, and I add it in just as a visual cue so they can understand where it's going. The problem you have is I would go, oh, that's okay, I'm not going to save that. I will just close that down, right? And then when I open up for the next class, or if I need to refer back to that workspace again, I would expect it to be unchanged, right? No, because auto saves on. So me personally, I just don't use auto save because 1, I save as I'm going, and 2, there's always a auto recovery file that you get from desktop if it does fail. So I don't really need it, but you just need to be aware. Look, if you're in an environment that you shouldn't have a workspace open and playing about with it, even if your intent is not to save that, just be aware that it might have autosave on and it might cause you a few problems. All right. Anyway, let's get back to these slides. So bear with me a second. Oops, sorry, here we go. Okay, so to summarize on this, effectively FME Server with versioning enabled provides an organization the perfect risk mitigation tool for dealing with the introduction of human errors that go on to break a workspace and potentially risk all sorts of issues within an organization. I like to say without versioning, it's hell on earth. I mean, that's not quite true, but yeah, it's obviously a risk. So FME and unconventional thinking, let's summarize these problems, and then we're just going to go into a live demo and we're going to show how we use FME to solve them. Problem number 1, we talked about the training environment there. I set up AWS machines. They're exactly the same as each other. Why is that a good thing? Because from a trainer's perspective, if you imagine a classroom, everybody has different laptops, everybody has different desktops, and there's different versions of Windows, different versions of all sorts of different things. You know, sometimes those things can cause a problem when you run a workspace that's unique to that person. And that can create problems when you're trying to identify what is the problem. Is this person doing something wrong? You neuter that and you take out all those variables, and then you have this fantastic environment where 99.999% it's a user mistake, which helps you to be able to help them to get the most from training. However, when you use AWS, there's a few quirks on that, right? And I'll explain that when we get to that. But one of them is with IP. AWS takes an IP address. At the end of the day, when you switch that computer down, because you know you don't want to leave it running because you know they charge you for that, and then you bring it back up the next day, that IP address changes. So hold that thought on IP address changes and what impact that might have when you're doing FME server training. And then problem number 2, FME server firewall configuration. It's not so much of a problem, it's just a mundane task. You know, I have an example of where I want to deploy AWS. I want to set up a new machine, new environment, and with that, I've got to remember all the ports that I open. I want to be able to automate that, so I just and allow some configuration around that so that I can do it. And yeah, we'll show you that in the live demo. So in one of my pretty little AWS machines, here we go. Let's get to problem number 1. So let's go into, hold on a second. So this is the key thing here. So the host file. So the host file stores information on, you know, your IP, your DNS being the name that associates with the IP. So let's say my server, and I'll have an IP address. And when I type in my server in your web browser, it'll take you to the REST manager. And that's great. Okay, so let's open up one of these host files. So I open this up. There we go. So I've got local hosts, standard on computers. I've got a dev server and I've got training server. And look, they're just names. Okay, they're really arbitrary. I just, when I'm in a server environment, you know, I have dev server. I'm in a train environment. I have its training server, but they really hit the same thing. Okay, so it's insignificant. However, if I close down my computer, or if I close down, sorry, let's be specific, if I close down the AWS instance and I relaunch it the following day, this will change. So that means when somebody types in dev server, they're no longer going to get that REST interface, and that's going to be a problem. So what can I do to solve that? Well, let's break it down into its individual components. So here's a workspace I made earlier, made a wee while ago actually. So let's talk about what this does. So creator, think of a creator as just like a placeholder for something. It can effectively create 100 records, 1,000 records, or just one record. And it can also double up as an initiator. In this case, I'm creating one record. It's like a placeholder. And then I'm going to use system caller, right? Because I want to be able to use ipconfig to find out what my IP address is at this moment in time. And then I want to take that ipconfig and I want to capture that information somehow and put it to a file. Okay, so if I open this up, you can see ipconfig, send it to temporary location folder, and it's going to be called ipconfig_result.txt. And then I can pass that to a feature reader, and I can read in that file. Great, which I've done. So let's have a look at that. Then I get 11 pieces of line coming out, and I'm like, well, I don't need all this junk, so I'm going to have a tester, and the only one I'm interested in is this IPv4 address. And that's the one I'm going to pull out. That's going to be my IP address. I'm going to clean it up, get rid of the stuff that I don't need on that. And there's a few different ways to do the same thing, but I've just simplified it so we look what I've done. So this part here, before the colons, I've just, hey, take this, replace it with nothing, and then I've got a nice clean attribute. And then here's where the power comes in. So this is my data file data. This is my value that's going to be the content that goes inside and overwrites that existing host file document. So I've opened this up. So you can see that just looks like the host file that we looked at, except this time it's taking that text line data value and it's assigning them in the correct location so that every one of my names that are in that host file is updated. Okay. And then I go, right, well, that's great, fantastic. Now I've got 10 10 people all in training, and I've got to go and I've got to run this on each individual computer to bring it up so that I know they got the right IP address. No, because one of the tricks for those of you that may have not used this, if you go to the translation log, I've still got it highlighted because I was just checking everything was working. You see this here, command line to run this workspace. So what I can actually do now, if I'm really smart about it and I don't want to log into my computers, I know that they'll log into their computers. So maybe I could set a trigger that when they log into their computers, this guy goes and runs and updates that host file. So by the time they go to their my server, it's going to work. Exactly. So if we go into my scheduled tasks and I go update host file, you can see I've got actions. It's going to run. It's going to run that FME and that workspace. And then my triggers is on remote connection to any session. And you might go, well, wait a minute, what if you log off, get back on, log off, get back on? How many times? Doesn't matter, right? It doesn't make a difference because all it's going to do is going to update the host file with the same information. And it literally takes 3 seconds to run. So what that means is now when I'm training, I know that every one of my machines has this on it already and it will automatically update for me. So it's one less thing I have to mess around with doing. And I don't have to pay for an elastic IP, which actually costs money, and you only have a small allocation to start with. So I save money by doing this as well. So good example of a really great tool using the command line with FME, and happy to share this information with you after. Problem number 2, it's not so much a problem, it's really more of a solution to help make my time a little bit easier so I'm not messing around on other things. So we have a workspace here that's going to deal with the firewall issue. Let's not call it an issue, but you know, FME server requires you to, in your firewall, to have, like, if it's port 80 you're running on, for example, you need to have that port open or you're not going to be able to access your REST interface. If you've not got port 7078 open, your automations and topics aren't going to work correctly. Actually, it's not so much your automations, it's more your topics. You're not going to be able to monitor your topics because they don't work. And then you go a whole load of other things. So your emails, IMAP, SMTP. Anyway, but if you know about them all, maybe it would be good so that you don't have to go through a document every time and do this manually, and you can just do it at the click of a button, which is exactly what I've done. So in this workspace, again, let's just zoom in so everybody can see it. We have a creator, that's our initiator. That's the thing that's kind of gonna like just create our records, okay, without anything in them. And you can see what I've done. Oh, by the way, I like to do this, right? You know, especially I'm not a command line guru by any means. I have to Google stuff, and you know, sometimes I have to refer to safe software to see what they do. And I like to add that in my workspace, so I have a reference point to go back to. Why did I do this? Like, oh, that's right, that's why I did this. So anyway, you can see here I have a few attribute creators, and I've got WebSocket 7078, all the way through. These are all the ports that I want to be able to open. Maybe not, I've got a configuration for that, okay? So, but right now, these are all the ports that are potentially essential for what we want to be able to do. And then we've got a tester, and that tester removes anything that has a null value. So in other words, anything that we don't want to add or delete, we're not going to process. It takes the command line that's set in these attributes. Actually, let's just have a look at that. So here's SMTP25. Open ports command, and then we've got 3 conditional values. The last one is null, so that means it doesn't conform to any of these. I just want it to be null. The first one is, so this is going to say, right, if the parameter, use a parameter that says add, and I want to add this port being yes, then carry out this command. So it's going to open up port 25, it's going to call it FME SMTP25, say firewall add rule equals, and this is the name, and then versus do the same thing but delete rule name this. Okay, so let's just test it out, right? So let's go and run this, and that's a system caller that will obviously apply those commands. So let's go rerun workspace, and so right now we've got delete, so I moved out the last ones that I did. So let's go add, and we want port 80. Well, if we're running on port 80, we don't need 8080, and let's just say we want yes to all the other ones. Okay, let's run that. I'm gonna run it. Here we go. And now what I can do is I can go into here, and you can see that I haven't got these in here right now, but that's just because I need to refresh it. So I'll just quickly do that. FME 80, FME 8080. It's actually funny, I thought I said no to that one. Maybe I left it ticked by accident. 993, 25, 465. So all the ports have been added. Okay, and of course, like the reason I added a delete is because, you know, if I was messing around, I just want a quick way to remove them or add them, and it just allows me configuration. It's not probably something I would set up as an automation because it's certainly in what I'm using it for is not applicable, but it allows me using FME in the command line to have a little tool that I can use to quickly provision up a solution to allow me just not have to worry about these things. So I spend less time troubleshooting because it's set up for me correctly. Right, so that's those ones, and I think we're just about to get on to, just go back to this again. Okay, there we go. So hopefully that's useful. Using FME and command line, it's a super handy thing to be able to do, and there's lots of information online for how to use command line, and just have a play. And once you get there, it's lots of different little tools that you can do. Okay, so best to last, right? AWS recognition service. Let's play. This is a live demo. I've made some points, general points to consider for new transformer fun. Can't even talk now. Fun. So you've just had a new transformer. It sounds really exciting. That transformer links to some other service, and you go, right, okay, I'm just going to straight into that, and we're going to have a bit of fun with it. And then you realize that, oh wow, well, I don't have an AWS account. I've got to set up token security. I don't even know how to do that. So just remember, the long and short of that, to keep this simple, because I think we're running a bit low on time, is that just because something new there, it's not necessarily just a case of just jumping straight into it and having a play. There's usually some other things that you need to do first to get it set up. And I'm actually going to do that for you. So I'm going to talk you through the sort of development cycle. And I'm going to try and keep this, because we are running short on time. So I'm going to try and keep this as short and concise as possible for you. So I'm going to try not to get into too much discussion around it. So let's just get into it. Right, so I think the key thing is, have you got a transformer? Will it just work? Let's just wait and see. So let's go now and let's go and create one of these. So I got a little workspace that I've created earlier on. Right, so I have a creator. I have the recognition connector. That's the transformer that allows me to connect to AWS in this recognition service. And then I'm going to run it. And then I realize I have to have all this information here. Okay. So for those of you, this is definitely worth watching. If you haven't used AWS, but you would like to be able to have a play with us, if you go into, if you create an AWS account, if you don't have one, and if you do have an AWS account, once you've logged in and you get this like home console, management console screen, you click on your user profile. In my case, I'm ExtremeX. You go down to my security credentials, open it up. And you go to users, and you can see I've got like I've already done one earlier, World Tour 2020. You go to add user, and I'm going to say example New Zealand. You want programmatic access, next, and then you want attach existing policies directly. Just do a short typo recognition. You want Amazon recognition full access. And I'm not going to bother doing the rest, but you just go next, okay. I will do the rest actually, because you probably want to see that. It's quite easy. Preview, here we go. Create user. And the key thing you need to do, and please just save this somewhere, you want that access key ID, and you want the secret access. Now we've done that, we're going to have those details, and we're going to put them in here, and then we're ready to rock and roll. The only other thing is, in this instance, we want to be able to put in a file name. I've got a file name, I run a business, and how I see this application fitting, working in a business model, you capture receipts. You want, if you can take a picture of them, and it will process those receipts, extract the information like what the company is, what the value is, and put it in a folder somewhere and allocate a date against it. It goes into a GST period, makes it so much easier for reporting at the end of it, all of which is a manual task up until now. So anyway, we have a picture. Let's just run it and see what it looks like. So we're going to run this. Takes a moment, and we'll have a look. So right now, incremental development. Let's think about it. So we've set up everything. We're going to transform. We're just going to look at what we get. Take one example of a picture. We're going to supply it, and let's see what we get. Now, output. So wait a minute. First thing, one record goes in, which is an image, and we get 63 out. Now, 63 is obviously going to be a representation of the information that's going to be extracted. So this is using the image to text. We go in here. Let's have a look at the records. Here we go, text. I'm going to fly through this quite quickly. I'm just going to scroll down. Look, there's a value, $118, but I know it's not $118. Okay, some other information. Let's see, $118. Ah, okay. Problem number one, right? So on our first attempt, we've taken a receipt, but we can't see in there what the value is, right? We can't see that value. We know this is because it was $122 something. So look, see how I've named the file names? That's what I want from this. I want them to be able to put this out in a file name like this. I know it's $122.66. So we have an issue straight away, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to come off the incremental development. We're going to think about what are the types of things that you have to do when you realize something doesn't quite do what you want it to do, right? Perhaps there's things that you can do with an FME workspace, FME workbench and developer workspace that will manipulate that data such that you get the result that you want. Again, being very conscious that we've not got a huge amount of time, we're going to go into one I did earlier. So right here, I'm just going to fly through each component and what it does, and then we're going to see what the result we get by using this one versus the last one. Okay, so same thing, we got a feature reader. Now it's powered by user parameters because, you know, we want it to be nice and tidy now, make it easier to supply data. We're going to extract the bounds of the image, and that's so that we can calculate out which way the image is rotated. Perhaps if we supply that in, you know, the correct rotation to AWS, maybe there's not a correct rotation, but if we can play about with that, maybe we can get a better idea of what works better. So we're bringing that information about which rotation is assigned to the image, but we need to attach that to the image so we've got that value. We're going to apply that rotation, so it doesn't need rotated to a portrait view, or can it stay in landscape view? What's that going to be? We're going to do that, and then it splits off into two streams. One is like, well, you know, right now I supplied one image, right, and that is a full image to the AWS recognition service. What if maybe I divided that up? Maybe if one image has got like 100 pieces of text on it, maybe if I split it up so it only processes a quarter each time, would that be more optimal? Maybe that wouldn't confuse it. That's a good question. And that's what we did. So we'll have a look at that. And then we clip those geometries across the image so that we end up with just 4 separate images with each part of that receipt. And each part of that receipt, 4 of them will go through the AWS recognition service. And then we got this conditional filter. I've gone in and, you know, through testing, I've looked at, you know, what are the typical text associations that would allow me to extract the New Zealand dollar value from that and the total value from that? Does it work every time? No, these are the best ones, okay? And I'm going to filter them out, and I don't care about all the other ones because that's just junk, but I still need to do more stuff to it. I need to clean it up, and I have to do an attribute manager to go and assign some values to it. And then we go through a couple of things like validation, fix known, and remove alphanumerics. So yeah, if you've got alphanumerics in there, it kind of spits a dummy a wee bit, so you need to go and sort that out. And we're going to sort it out. We're making the assumption that the total is always going to be the largest number on the invoice, right? Yeah, so we only want the total. We don't want the individuals. Maybe we want the individuals later, but for now, we just want the totals. And then we're going to aggregate it so we're only left with the total value. And then I'm going to send an email to myself because this is just testing right now. Maybe I would want to actually upload that file into a specific location with other parameters. But for now, I'm just sending an email to myself. So let's just rerun this. So this is the same file that's going in. Let's have a look at that. BP_122.66. And right now I've assigned a name to it, BP. But you know, I'll talk about that in just a second. And we'll be about another 5 minutes, folks. Okay, so we're not far away from being finished here. Here we go, almost finished. Okay, so I'm just going to look at the aggregated value. So we had a file name called 122.66, and let's look at what it called it, 122.86. Ah, that's different, right? Don't worry, I got you. So this is the really cool thing right here. I'm gonna prove this to you. So when I look at the image, just goes to show human error, right? When I named this file, first off, I thought it was 122.66, but it is actually 122.86. So that not only, if you remember the first time, we didn't even see that value, right? But by applying this process in logic, working through incremental development, testing things that work, understanding that, and building a workspace to take all those best components, you can get with something that truly works, right? So now, in an ideal world, what I would do, I would look to not just extract the values. I'd probably want to extract the GST, and I'd have certain things set up for that. But I'd certainly want to extract the company name, and maybe this is what I do. So extracted name, BP, right? And I have an aggregator, and I have conditional logic that will go, does it contain, so I have a finite number. I don't have lots and lots of different companies I deal with, maybe 20 different companies. I put them in there. If it contains this, apply that, and so on. And then, of course, the last piece of the puzzle would be, I have this rolled up to an app, use a FME Server app. I take my images, and then I get that data extracted and automatically puts that in the correct location in my accounting OneDrive, in my accounting location with the correct date, etc. And it makes it so much more easy for me to reconcile. So AWS Recognition Service is absolutely the best text, image to text that I've seen yet. It was far better than the OpenCV that was available. And I'm actually quite excited about what we're going to be able to do with this. And hopefully that sort of fast-paced show and tell there gives you guys a bit of excitement too. So on that note, I'm just going to say a very big thank you to everybody, and hopefully we'll see you after this. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send them over or send me an email. And on that note, I'm going to hand back to John. John?
Yep. Am I on?
That's good. For a second there, I thought I'd been talking to myself for 25 minutes.
Hey, Darren, thanks very much for that. Just clicking on sharing my webcam now, so just bear with me for a moment, folks. So yeah, I'm back here. So look, thanks very much, Darren. And look, that is terrific. I think there's a lot of features in there that once you start delving into FME that you can make the most of there. And I'm just going to click on showing my screen as well. So that is the end of our 3 presentations today. I'm just going to say that if there are any questions, please do send them through. I know that the guys have been answering some directly, which is great. If there's any that come through in the next few minutes, we can address them. But just quickly, Kieran, Gary, is there anything else you wanted to share at this time in relation to any questions?
No, I think we both covered them all.
Yeah, I think I've answered everything. They were quite targeted, most of them I got, and the other ones I've read out. I think, yeah, just the authentication one was important. Certainly an aspect that I missed out. So that's just there in the configuration of server apps. That's
terrific. Okay. Well, thanks very much, guys. I'll just move on to a couple of slides here just to finish with. And I would just say that, tomorrow there will be an email that comes out with an opportunity for feedback, and we'd certainly appreciate it. It's the first time that we've undertaken a world tour in a virtual sense. So very much looking forward to some feedback if you can. We've tried to keep today's session to 2.5 hours, because we think it's, whilst virtual is great, it can be tough looking at a small screen for a period of time. So hopefully that's worked in well with you guys. And as I say, we'll be keen to hear your feedback. So just a few more last comments from me, and I'll just go through a few slides here. These are going to come out in the slide deck as well. So just a few reminders. Getting a free trial of FME, there's a link that we'll send through. If for any reason you're doing some work on COVID-19, or COVID-19 means that you have to be working from home and can't access some of those license files from work, we can get licenses created and issued to you. They're going to take you through to the 30th of September, so that's a very generous offer there by Save Software. If you go onto our website, there are some useful resources there, and some of those include licensing. So if you haven't used a home license or one of those COVID licenses before, there's some details as to the information that you may need to get them up and running. It also includes links to the latest downloads of FME as and when they become available. So please do have an opportunity to have a look at that when you get a chance. Just on training, as I say, Darren has successfully run some virtual training courses now. We look to do them over a 3-day period so that, again, you're not locked into a small screen for a couple of days. So we're looking at a 3 or 4 day session. That 4th day could be something tailored for your own organization. So please do get in contact with us. We've got a training at Locus email address that you can use. Future webinars, there does appear to be some good demand across New Zealand and Australia for some of the virtual webinars that we've been discussing today. Some of the titles that we're looking at doing some presentations on includes optimizing FME, hands-on with FME server apps, beyond GIS in terms of local government areas, and then also some of the new licensing models that are available for FME. In the early days, there really was only one way you could get FME, and that was to purchase a license outright. And for larger organizations, some ELAs were possible. These days, however, there's pretty much any solution that you're looking for to get FME. And SAFE are really all about making FME as available to all parties as is possible, and particularly FME Server. You will have seen today that there's a number of features with FME Server that can make your life a little bit easier and more streamlined. So if we can help you get into that FME Server software, we're really keen to do that, really keen to talk to you. And I would say that there's a great range of flexible options now to achieve that. Again, just a reminder, all of these slides, etc., will be published on our website, and we're looking to do that by next Tuesday, but I'm sure Angie will prod me if that's not possible. The SAFE roadshow there at the bottom, there's a link for that as well. Just finally, also, we just want to give a shout out to the FME User Conference that SAFE unfortunately had to postpone from this year to 2021. It's just one of those things where we couldn't achieve that with travel. And so we're looking at it being held in August 2021. I know there's a few New Zealand people that are looking at attending and had actually registered to attend this year. Such a shame that that couldn't proceed, but hopefully we'll see those people there in Vancouver in 2021. In the meantime, SAFE are running another competition with 2 tickets available to the UC. The details are that you can upload for yourself a picture of the FME Lizard cooling eye mask, just what you need for summer, or when you're stressing out. And basically, if you just follow the instructions that we will send out to you, you can enter that competition and potentially get a couple of complimentary tickets to that FME user conference next year. That does bring to a conclusion today's events. As I say, I just want to have a particular thank you to the presenters, Gary and Kieran and Darren. It takes a lot of time to put together presentations, and it's a bit challenging this time around because we're doing it in a virtual sense. But I think the guys did a terrific job, and I just do really want to thank them for that. Just in relation to FME itself, we get a lot of questions as to, this isn't working so well, or this, could something be more streamlined? And a lot of the time our answer is, are you using the most recent version of FME? And quite often, an organization might be 1 or 2 versions behind. So I do encourage every organization, where it is at all possible, to get on to the latest iteration of FME. In a lot of instances, it's going to solve a bunch of your questions that you might have, and it's always a very good place to start. My final comment is to thank my colleague Angela Worsley. She's put together the running of the Australian and the New Zealand Virtual World Tour events, and also a shout out to my partner over in Australia, Ruby Donaldson. Without their tremendous assistance and efforts, this wouldn't be possible. So again, I just want to say thanks to Angie in particular, and to all the Locus team who have made this possible. Really appreciate you guys logging in today and listening to what we've had to say. I'm sure that there is something there for everybody. Again, if there's any questions on today's webinar, send them through. It would be our pleasure to address them and come back to you. Looking forward to seeing all of you in person sooner rather than later, and let's hope in 2021 we'll be in Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch as we have been in prior years. But for now, thanks very much, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks,
Cheers, guys.
everyone. Bye.
Are we muted?